Hey folks, today we're going to be taking a look at Dev Diary 16 inflation for Grey Eminence. Apologies for this being a little bit late. This one's from November. The December Dev Diary has actually already come out, so in a couple of days you'll see that up on the channel as well when I get time to sort that out for you. And yeah, it's another budgetary, kind of financial focused Dev Diary. So I think this is like the second or third one in a row, all about how the money works, which, is understandable. I imagine quite a lot of the game is based around, money and all that good stuff. So this time around, we're taking a look at inflation. It's one of those mechanics that you might not think much about if you don't get excited about economics, but that's perfectly understandable, which is why we've designed it to fit in our optional complexity design paradigm. So this is something they mention like every dev diary, basically. The game, you can come at it and basically ignore large parts of the game if you want to, and the AI will basically do a lot of stuff for you, or you can dive in and get super involved in it and things like that. If you play Paradox games, I imagine you probably do if you're watching this video. I imagine like you can dive into the economy like in Victoria 3 style, maybe not that detailed, but that is way more economically, you can get involved in, rather than something like EU4 where it's just basically trade routes and buildings. So that's basically, I think, looking at what they've said so far, that's basically going to be, you can just do the bare minimum in a section of the game you're not that interested in, or you can dive in and, go crazy and super concentrate on that area and do a lot of stuff. So yeah, it'd be interesting when the game obviously comes out, how that exactly works, how much it affects you if you don't go into it. But so far they've been saying that's what they're doing, so we'll see, obviously, when it comes out. So sources, let's start by going over where inflation might come from in an economy. We've already mentioned one of the biggest culprits in the previous dev diary on minting, which is on the channel. I'll put a link to it at the end of the video. Every country by default creates a small amount of money out of nothing, proportionate to GDP via minting. This money is deposited directly into the country's treasury, and it represents the real life phenomena like currency issuance, signarage, I'm not sure what that means, and debasement, which we will not model separately. So, you'll just have that basic kind of money coming in every month, like most games. While minting cannot be disabled, it happens on a small enough scale that it cannot become a problem on its own. We've balanced it to be roughly in line with historical inflation rates, 1 to 3% per year. I kind of thought, I don't know, it'd be interesting how they know that from medieval economies. I mean, I'm sure there is a way. It'd be interesting to read about it, to be honest, like how they know what inflation was like. And to be honest, with how the medieval economies worked, how inflation even really worked then, because I would imagine a lot of stuff was just bartering or trading stuff rather than actual money. But obviously this game does cover 600 years from 1300s to the 1900s, so obviously it's going to get more and more important as the game progresses. Once you unlock the paper money technology, however, you get the option via the budget UI to increase the rate of minting significantly. This, of course, will provide you with an immediate spike in revenue, but if left unchecked, excessive minting may result in hyperinflation. Printing machine go burr. It's a lot of hyperinflation, very topical at the moment. So yeah, kind of interesting to see them mention that there. Obviously, if you're desperate for money, you can do it, but the long-term ramifications are bad unless you can quickly fix it. The second big source of inflation is the mining of precious metals. Historically, gold and silver were the two elements at the heart of most currencies during Grey Eminence's 600-year time span. Fun fact, up until the 19th century, silver held a vastly more prominent position than gold as a currency standard. I have seen that before. I wonder why gold took over. I think a lot of it is due to, actually it's really interesting about like how Spain and Portugal got so much silver from the New World. You'd think they were like mega rich because the galleons that Drake and people went after. But the problem is they actually brought so much silver back, it devalued silver to such a point. I imagine that's why gold took over, because there was just so much silver. You think silver has been pretty rare. I mean, of course it is pretty rare compared to other things, but yeah, Spain kind of had all that money for a bit, and then, well, silver got worth less and less because there was just so much of it in Europe at that point. So I imagine that's why gold took over. I'd have to look into it, but I imagine that's why. Due to the lack of major industrial uses, the fact that unlike other consumer goods, precious metals aren't really presumed per se, we've chosen not to represent gold and silver as trade goods. I mean, that's kind of makes sense. Like, you could trade gold and silver, but like it says, they weren't like used by anyone. So I can understand why they've done that. Instead, gold and silver mines directly produce money which is deposited straight into the owner's treasury, or as local wealth if the mines happen to be owned by the local population. The fact that precious metal mines might be owned by the non-state entities puts you, the player, in an awkward position where you will have to deal with the effects of inflation caused by your local elites mining too much gold or silver. Well, that's actually a cool mechanic. So for mines that you're nobles and the bureaucrats and things like that own, which they've covered before, how that's going to work. Yeah, if they own mines, they can just go crazy, just printing money themselves, and that's going to affect your realm, and you've got to deal with it. Like, I guess you can like revoke buildings probably from your elites. Maybe you'd have to do that if they're going too crazy with it. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that works in the future. And here we go, nice little UI. Obviously showed the population, the treasury, the GDP. I guess this is of a nation. Oh, the silver mines of Tyrol, the largest in Europe throughout the Middle Ages. Their vast wealth would contribute significantly to the rise of the Habsburg dynasty in Austria when they eventually inherited the lands of Tyrol. Oh, so I guess this is just Tyrol itself. Maybe? Yeah, maybe it must be. And then the inflation is 5%, and 4.4% of it has been caused by silver mines. So yeah, I guess because they own the silver mines, it's probably making them a lot of money, but it's also devaluing their money at the same time. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see exactly how that works. Like, can you just shut these down if you want to? I imagine you must be able to, but we'll see, obviously, in the future. So what are the actual effects of inflation? We've mentioned before how Grey Eminence uses a single universal currency, so things like exchange rates aren't present in the game. Yeah, that'd just be crazy if they had different currencies. Like, how would that even work in a grand strategy game? It'd be interesting to know. Let me know in the comments if you've ever played a grand strategy game that has like currencies between nations. I don't think I've ever seen it that I can think of. So yeah, I think that would be one step too far. Like, I just want gold. I don't want like British gold, French gold, and all this like that. That would get way too complicated. Instead, we model inflation as a stealth tax on the population. Each year, the value of local wealth in all social classes reduced proportional to the rate of inflation. In effect, sources of inflation, may they be mining or precious metal mining, erode the purchasing power of the population. So yeah, instead of your gold technically being kind of worth less, they just take some gold out of the system every year, I guess. Rather than, say, building costs 10 gold, it's not going to cost 11 gold the next year. You'll just have one less gold kind of thing. You know what I mean? Yeah, buildings will get more expensive. You'll just have less gold every year as they kind of take a chunk out for inflation, which is a kind of good way to do it, I suppose. Otherwise, buildings could get pretty crazy, especially as there's only one currency. It would be interesting if it did do that. So if you had inflation, say a building costs like 10 gold, and then you don't build it in 10 years, and the inflation rate's 3%, then the building would cost you 13 gold to make. It would actually be interesting if it did work that way, actually. I can see why they've done it this way. It's way easier because they just take gold out rather than having to amend costs across the board. But yeah, we'll see how it works out, obviously. For now, we decided not to apply inflation to the national and elite treasuries for the purposes of simplification. Otherwise, you have to calculate whether it's actually worth it to get X from mining gold if your entire treasury will decline by Y per year. But we might include this feature pending balancing. So yeah, they're already saying if it doesn't work out, they'll change it. Now, the most obvious negative effect is increase in discontent, which can lead to popular rebellions. Inflation on its own cannot trigger rebellion outright. The discontent needs something else to latch onto. Nevertheless, since people virtually always have something to be dissatisfied about, very true, like internal politics or famine, inflationary discontent is still remain a threat to the stability of the country. So again, they've mentioned this kind of in a few dev diaries where there's these like little features like inflation. And there was something, was it famine or something, a couple of dev diaries ago. Actually, no, it was wages. Yeah, if you lowered wages, they said on its own it wouldn't trigger rebellion, but coupled with other things it could. So this is another thing, if you have high inflation and you're not paying people correctly, those two things together might cause a faction, a rebellion or something. But on their own, if they're the only bad thing you have, it probably won't do. So, yeah, something to keep an eye out, obviously. Of course, the real downside of inflation is that it eats away at the wealth of your population. Destroying local wealth might not seem like a huge deal, and to be fair, to many governments in the mid-14th century, this erosion wasn't really felt as a loss of revenue, since the taxation was entirely delegated to elite. But the drag that inflation can cause in an economy will add up to a significant opportunity cost over the centuries, because obviously you're not getting that money that you can invest, and then if you invest in the past, then in the future, you reap the benefits of that investment. So basically saying like, yeah, you might not see the effects of inflation straight away in the early game, but if you're just basically throwing away money at the beginning, then once you get to the end game, realms that haven't been doing that have been able to invest in buildings, maybe invest in their army, whatever else you can use gold for in the game. they'll have invested that money and get the rewards later on, especially as the game, like I say, is 600 years. Then it's really going to make that difference. I play like Crusader Kings. You can invest in buildings at the beginning, and you probably can't expand as much, but then by end game, those buildings are huge bonuses for you. But even then, it's only like 300 years, so you can get away without doing it. But I imagine over 600 years, you're really going to see those effects. So again, it'd be interesting to see how that works out. Speaking of hyperinflation, let's discuss what it is and what its extra effects are. We define hyperinflation as annual inflation over 100%. I mean, that is pretty hyper. This might seem like a high threshold to reach, but to be clear, it is. But in desperate times, you might find yourself relying on the printing press for longer than you would have liked. Periods of hyperinflation greatly increase existing discontent from inflation and also unlock the possibility of inflation-fearing factions to form. In other words, during hyperinflation, discontent can lead to rebellions on its own. These factions will aim to forcefully shut down the printing press and close down precious metal mines. Oh, that's actually cool. It's not just like a general rebellion. They're not just people saying like, oh, I hate you, let's get rid of you and get some other guy in charge or something. Their demands will be to shut down printing money and close your mines. So yeah, that's actually a cool way of doing it, because in most games you probably just have a faction that wanted to, overthrow you or change your government type or something like that. But this is actually like, look, we'll shut down your ability to print money and we'll close your mines. So it'd be interesting as well if you don't own the mines and you lose. I guess it forcefully closes them, and then the nobles will hate you for like not protecting them, I guess. So yeah, kind of interconnected a lot more than maybe you'd think. But yeah, that's it for the dev diary for November. Like I say, apologies, it is December, but we're catching up for them. And then modability, as always, they're allowing modability as much as you want with the game. A lot of stuff on how you can change inflation. So if you're interested in mods, you can have a read of this. I'll put it in the link in the description down below. And they're continuing development. And they're just saying next year they're hoping to make some nice strides, and hopefully we'll see some playable gameplay in the early part of next year. But that's it for Dev Diary 16, all about inflation for Grey Eminence. Hit like if you've enjoyed it today. If you're new here and you're watching them, I've got a playlist of all the Dev Diaries if you want to catch up. It's on the channel, but subscribe and I'll be covering the game until it comes out. But that's going to be it for today, and I'll see you in the next one.